Well, this book here, Battlefield Blessings, I've already had one of these books signed by Colonel Spivey to General Rick Hillier and to our Minister of Defense, Peter MacKay, and I'm going to get them off to these guys. 365 stories out of World War II, Battlefields and Blessings. Colonel Larkin Spivey is a professor of military history. He has twice this year been honored for his books that involve military history. Welcome, please, Colonel Spivey. Welcome.
Thank you, Reverend Mainse. It's an honor to be here.
Just David.
Yes, sir.
Well, I called you Colonel, so that's tit for tat. Anyhow, you've been in Canada before. You studied actually at Royal Military College, RMC in Kingston.
Well, it was the Canadian Forces Command and Staff College at Fort Frontenac.
It wasn't RMC. Okay.
No, I was a Marine Corps officer, came here after my tour in Vietnam. It was really the highlight of my military career, my year in Canada.
Well, you're here to kind of straighten me out on a number of these things. I want to get straightened out on some of the events, like when you've written a book on the Revolutionary War. Now, this is World War II.
Yes.
Okay, the Revolutionary War. I've got to go back to that for a moment. I heard a story, and until in the green room a few minutes ago, I was not able to authenticate this story. It was hearsay, and rather apocryphal, and that was that Benedict Arnold led an expeditionary force to liberate the northern colonies from the tyranny of Britain and cause us to join the 13 southern colonies. I asked the colonel, professor of military history, was that true? What's your answer?
It was true. Well, he did get lost on the way. Benedict Arnold did lead a force up through the wilderness of Maine at that time.
Yeah.
They got lost several times. They suffered terribly, but they did make it to Quebec.
Okay.
But they were defeated at the gates of Quebec and were ultimately unsuccessful in that vain attempt to bring Canada into the fold.
Well, I kind of think God, you know, there's something in the Bible about boundaries being set by God. Do you think that God has anything to do? Like, I often get the impression from some preachers that the United States of America is favored by God over all other nations. How would you respond to that? I don't blindside you on that. You're an American, I'm a Canadian. How would you respond to that kind of an approach?
I believe that God was involved in the founding of America, that the founders of America turned to God when they cut the ties of royal authority that went back for centuries. Mm-hmm. And they intentionally turned to God as the source of authority in America. As the Declaration says, we hold these truths. We're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that God blessed that founding of America and has blessed America since in certain critical situations when the nation's survival was at stake. Not at the expense of other nations, but I do believe He's had a special place.
Mm-hmm. I believe He has a special place for Canada as well, and for individuals. I mean, God is pro-people. God works on an individual level.
Right. I don't believe that God has a relationship with a nation. It's with you and me that He has a relationship.
Okay. And you have some Canadians in here.
Yes.
Now, in the speech that President Reagan made after the tragic death of the astronauts, he quoted a Canadian. Do you remember that quote? About touching the face of God?
Yes.
That was one of the Canadian heroes in World War II. Talk about a couple of the Canadians that are in here.
Right. Well, a young man named John McGee, he joined the RCA, the Royal Canadian Air Force, in 1940. And at one point, he wrote this amazing poem called High Flight. I've shed the surly bonds of earth, reached out and touched the face of God. And it's been an inspiration ever since. And Reagan, President Reagan did quote that when he eulogized the Challenger astronauts in 1986. I grew up knowing a Canadian in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, named Hugh Godfroy, who was a student at Toronto University in engineering in 1940 when the war was just starting. And he joined the Canadian Air Force and went to Great Britain and rose to be a squadron commander and then a wing commander, and was an ace, shot down 7 German aircraft. flew a Spitfire, and he was always one of my great heroes in my life.
How did you get to know him?
Well, he was a member of my church.
Ah.
He became an
He
Episcopalian.
moved to the United States.
Yes, he was a doctor, moved to the U.S. and practiced in South Carolina as a general practitioner. But there were many other Canadian heroes in World War II, as you know. I mean, a Canadian division landed at Juno Beach on Normandy and fought along beside British-American divisions in that great operation. I've got several stories in this book that are amazing to me about a young man from Winnipeg named John Curry, who his diary is published on the Veteran Affairs site in Canada. His diary from World War II, relating his experiences on a small ship in the North Atlantic and the suffering of these poor sailors tossed about in the stormy seas and rescuing people under the most bitter conditions of cold and heavy seas in these small ships. But they're inspiring stories.
You know, we've had, in the Vietnam era, of course, there were the draft dodgers, they were called. A lot of them came to Canada to receive refuge, and some are trying now, you know, to escape either Afghanistan or Iraq. But when the United States of America did not come in at the beginning of World War II, Canada was there with Britain, of course, 1939. When Britain declared war and Canada came right alongside Britain, there were thousands of American young men that flooded into Canada and joined the Canadian military. Have you got any stories on those people?
Yes, no specific stories on Americans that joined the RCAF, but I know there was an American squadron in the British RAF that flew throughout the war. They eventually became under the U.S. command.
Yeah, when the United States joined the Allied effort.
Yeah. You mentioned the draft dodgers, and that was a sore point in my life for many years. But in recent years, I think we've come to some resolution of that situation back from the Vietnam era. You know, in Russia, they never had any war protesters. And we see the outcome of the Cold War, and eventually the Soviet Union collapsed from its own ideological contradictions.
If they did protest, of course, they were off to Siberia or,
so
worse.
We lived with bitter protests during the Vietnam era, and it was very aggravating to the military people it served. But in the long run, in the long perspective, it was a healthy thing within our nation to go through.
Is that not the freedom that we seek? When you have freedom, you have the best and the worst. Would you agree?
Yes, that's unfortunately the way God set it up. We have the freedom to do things that are not right.